Welcome to the Titans of Industry Weekly Show. These interviews are all about giving you a rich plethora of information for you to digest, process, and make it applicable to your life. I'm so thrilled because I have a guest who has become famous for speaking his mind, and that's exactly what people truly want, a hard dose of truth, even if they don't admit it. Today's guest is James Altucher, and who's an American hedge fund manager, entrepreneur, best-selling author, a podcaster. He's co-founded more than 20 companies, including Reset Inc. and Stock Picker, and he has admittedly failed at 17 of them, not shy about it at all. In fact, that's one of his high key points. He has published 11 books. He's a frequent contributor to publications including Financial Times, TheStreet.com, TechCrunch, Seeking Alpha, Thought Catalog, which I love, and the Huffington Post. USA Today named his book called Choose Yourself as one of the best 12 business books of all times, which is quite an achievement. James, how are you today?
Good, and thanks for having me on the podcast, Lior. This is an honor to be here.
Hey, no worries. I want to ask you today some questions that people would really care about, at the end of the day. And I'd like to start with this. Let's start.
You know what, Lior? I want you to ask me those questions too. I want you to ask me questions that nobody has ever asked me.
Well, I'll try. So let's begin with daily routines. I personally have my own habits, but you know what? There's really no way of knowing if you're missing out on some really productive daily habits that are just around the corner, but you just don't know about them. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? So what are some of your daily routines that you do that you think would be beneficial to share with other people?
That's an interesting way you put the question, because obviously there are daily habits that everyone basically knows whether they do them or not. Like, we all know it's better to sleep 8 hours a night than to sleep 2 hours a night, because sleeping rejuvenates the body, rejuvenates the brain, gives you energy, reduces the risk of disease, and so on. So we all know that there's these good habits that everyone talks about, and yet sometimes they're hard to do, these habits. But what are habits that one can do that people don't really know a lot about is kind of the way you worded your question. Am I correct?
Yes.
So here's one interesting habit that I try to do, and I'm sometimes successful at it. I think it's really important in the mornings, as soon as possible after waking up and after brushing your teeth and all that, to write down things that you feel vulnerable about or scared about. And it turns out, when you do that, it kind of sets the day, it sets the tone of the day in a very interesting and honest way, because, how often do we really admit in life the things that we're scared about, or the things that we're feeling vulnerable about, or the things that we're feeling anxious about? We usually try to hide those, and we usually try to hide those from the people around us. But if you start off the day just admitting them to at the very least yourself, then it's kind of a good way to sort of unleash the river of honesty on the rest of the day. But it turns out there's scientific research that shows that if you do this even just once for 20 minutes, 6 months later, you still have higher levels of happiness, according to whatever test they use to test this stuff. You still have higher levels of happiness than the people who did not do it. So there's some interesting link between being comfortable with the chaos, disorder, loneliness, and vulnerability in our lives and future happiness, which would seem odd. People always tell you, oh no, think positively, try to think positively. No, it actually, think honestly is what leads to future happiness. So that's an important habit.
That's very interesting. I guess it's an expenditure of power to admit the things that you're worried about or anxious about, and I guess that's why it's a confidence booster, you can say, in some ways. If you say, hey, you know what, I'll sit for 5 minutes, let me write down what really scares me, and then go at it, and it really makes you more conscious of what you got to tackle. So I understand where that's coming from, and you know what?
And not just what you have to tackle, but who you really are.
Right.
So if all you do is think about, oh, well, I'm confident and I'm going to be positive today, you're really kind of, and then a thought comes up that's negative, and you say, no, go away, negative thought. You're really kind of putting a straitjacket around your soul a little bit, and you're not opening yourself up to who you really are. You really are a much bigger, much more complex person than just the version of yourself that is restricted only by positive thoughts.
That's interesting. With regards to that, I'm an avid book reader. I read so much, it's crazy. Could you name 3 books that are very influential in your life? And maybe it's the same for you as it is for me. I read them so habitually that they almost become part of me.
Well, I'm a very avid reader. Like, I read constantly. I mean, right before this podcast, I was reading, and I'm not. Some people aren't avid readers. Some people are. I'm not suggesting one way is better than the other. There's some approach out there that says, "Oh, you must read in order to learn anything," but it's hard for me to pick like 1 or 2 because so many books have an impact on me per year. So I don't know if you want to narrow it down,
maybe some timeless ones and a recent one.
I mean, like some timeless ones. I think and it depends on category too. Like some books I read to get smarter, and some books I read to improve personally, and some books I read to get better as a writer, and some books I read just as purely escape, and some books I read for fact.
Why don't we do the personally?
Okay, so there's the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I think is a very good and readable book. It's not a self-help book like you would think. It's a book based on his own experiences, and I think it's a very satisfying book to read that will help anybody who reads it.
I've read it. I've personally read it.
It's a great book. And, along in that same category, and maybe even a little bit more biographical and even a little bit more business-oriented, but still with kind of a spiritual underpinning, is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. So Michael Singer basically went out into the woods in his 20s and decided, you know what, I'm just going to sit here forever and surrender the results. And by doing that, he ended up running a multi-billion dollar company. And he wrote The Untethered Soul, which is which Oprah kind of focused on. But The Surrender Experiment is the more biographical one, telling how he, how everything happened to him, and all these amazing things happened to him just by surrendering every day to whatever would happen.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Let me ask you, which person, and this is kind of the flip side to this, which person that you interviewed would you consider a must-listen interview just because it was so interesting?
Oh my gosh, that I can't tell you, because honestly, everybody to me has been so interesting. With very few. I mean, maybe there were a couple that weren't as interesting in the end, but I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people now on my podcast. The James Altucher Show. I mean, everybody from Mark Cuban and Peter Thiel to Arianna Huffington to Coolio to musicians like Jewel to writers like Ben Mesrick, who wrote the book behind the movie The Social Network, or Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian. There's so many interesting people I've interviewed, and I always, rather than saying like who's the best I've interviewed, I always think it's good to have one takeaway. Like when you read a book, it's really hard, or even when you do an interview, it's really hard to remember later more than 1 or 2% of that book or interview.
Like a golden nugget.
Yeah, like I always try to take away that nugget, that I call it the one takeaway. What's the one takeaway I have from this person? And there's always one. So, and I try, and even then it's sometimes hard to remember across hundreds of interviews. But I've really interviewed so many interesting people, and I do a lot of preparation for each podcast, and I'm really proud of the show.
Yeah, fair enough. And you kept it very politically correct answer. I want to ask you this.
I didn't mean for it to be that way. Like,
no, it's good. It's good.
I really can't say, is Peter Thiel more interesting than Coolio? I mean, for business people, maybe yes, and for people interested in rap, maybe no. Or
no, I understand.
So it's hard to say.
Sure. I want to ask you this. If you needed to if two 18-year-olds came to you today and said, hey, we want to develop 2 skills and we want to put all the effort in and we're ready to do anything, which 2 skills would have the greatest return on investments for people going forward, starting today at our present day in the business world? And how would they go about doing it? What would they do? Some of the action steps.
Well, okay, so that's 2 very different questions, because let me answer the second one. I think there's almost no way to learn skills without experience. Like, somebody could tell you stuff all day long, and like I said, you're only going to remember 1%. But when you do something, you're probably going to remember more like 50%. So that's 50 times as much learning that's happening. Right. But I would say, and again, a lot of this, are we talking about life skills for financial success, or are we talking about life skills for, kind of well-being and happiness?
I think everything is interrelated. If you're going to have a good marriage, it's probably because you have good business skills and you have some good well-being skills. Everything is like interconnected. So just 2 important skills that you'd say are mandatory or highly important.
Okay, well, here's one that I think young people really forget about, and that is, there's this saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with.
Sure.
And I think this is so incredibly important. Like, and people forget about it. I know I forgot about it in my 20s and my 30s and in part of my 40s, and I'll probably forget about it again in my 50s and 60s and 70s. But I try to remember it. And you really have to be around people you love and who inspire you and who are creative and who are, focusing on improving their own lives, so that inspires you and so that you can endeavor to be improving and in your own life.
Sure.
So I think that's your relationships are incredibly important, and too often we spend time with toxic people thinking, oh, well, I need to spend time with this person because then I'll make a lot of money. I need to work for this boss because he's really rich and I'll make a lot of money. Or I need to be with this romantic partner because they're sexy and everybody will like me because of that. But you really just want to be around good people who have a good influence on you.
Sure. You know what? This is probably my favorite one, because that's exactly what I do since I've learned this. So that's very interesting.
The other thing is, I mean, of course you can get into things like, oh, what are good ways to improve at sales? What are good ways to improve at negotiation? These are all important things too. I mean, negotiation, sales, well-being, creativity. These are all important skills. But if you're around good people, I was just reading a story this morning. So you know who Bill Murray is, right?
Actor, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So for about 6 or 7 of his movies, particularly early on, Harold Ramis was either the writer or his co-star or the director of the movies. And Harold Ramis, so Groundhog Day, Caddyshack, Stripes, Meatballs, Harold Ramis was involved in all these movies. Harold Ramis went to college. He was educated, smart guy. Here's how he met Bill Murray. Harold Ramis was playing golf, and Bill Murray was some high school kid running the hot dog stand at the 9th hole. But Harold Ramis was smart enough to say, hey, you got to stand next to the smartest person in the room, and that's how you find success. And so Harold Ramis always stood next to Bill Murray. Even though he didn't get fooled by all the education, all this, all that, he recognized talent and who was a good person to stand next to. And I think that's a valuable skill. Look how successful it was for Harold Ramis.
Sure. I understand you exactly. You know what? For me, it's and you'll laugh maybe, but I think the top skill to have right now is to learn the art of simplifying everything in your life. And anything that's complex for you, just outsource. Give to somebody else. Let him wreck his brain. Keep your life simple so you can focus on what you do best and be the most productive. And I guess the second thing would be the art of smiling throughout the day, meaning that no matter what's going on, you're in your flow. James, I want to ask you another question, and this is something I meant to ask you for a long time, because I've been reading your work since you've been featured on Stansberry, which is one of the publications that I read. Say someone wants to open a location-free business, something that's really, really independent, you can do it from anywhere, and wants to be successful, I mean from day one, not like a blog where it takes years to pick up, if ever, to pick up steam, something with present-day demand. What would you recommend if somebody wanted that kind of lifestyle? Do you have something in mind?
Well, so it depends what you mean by location free. So even like something like Uber or Airbnb, you could start it and run it from anywhere, but ultimately you need a lot of resources to come into play for you to have success. So I'm not sure you mean a company that complex, but I do think, a business where, let's look at the model for basically every business that's popping up lately. There's three components of it. There's excess capacity. So I'll use Airbnb as an example. In New York City, before Airbnb, there was an excess capacity of empty apartments. People were here sometimes and they weren't here other times. And meanwhile, all the hotels were full. So there was an excess capacity of empty rooms. And because the hotels were full, there were a lot of people who want to stay in New York City. It's one of the best cities in the world. So Airbnb became this platform in the middle to mediate between the people who want to buy excess capacity and the people who have excess capacity. So Uber is the same thing with empty car seats, and it goes on and on.
I think that's a very astute way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think it's very, I think the same way can be looked at with knowledge. So all of us either have or can develop excess knowledge that many people don't have. So you can have an excess knowledge about, in your case, maybe gold and silver stocks. Meanwhile, there are people who are, living in wherever who, they're busy at their jobs. They agree with you about gold and silver stocks. I'm just using this as an example.
Sure.
And they'd like to know more, but they don't have the time to figure it out. So you can create a newsletter that you can monetize. People can subscribe to it. That allows the people who want to buy your excess capacity of knowledge and have a platform in the middle that mediates, the transactions, the currency exchange, any customer service issues, refunds, questions, and so on. So a newsletter business is not just a newsletter; it's all these things on the platform in between the people who have knowledge and the people who want that knowledge. And I think that's a very location independent business, and a relatively resource free business that one could manage.
Definitely, and being an info entrepreneur is very powerful these days. And by the way, just for the record, this is a free letter that Wealth Research Group is running. So, anyways, let's move on. So, James, can you tell us? And this is a kind of personal, so tell me if I'm reaching here. Tell us a wild story, because I've seen other interviews that you've done as preparation. Tell us a 1 day or a 1 week financial gain that you've made, like wild, and what have you learned from that about business life, just in general?
You want a gain or you want a loss? You pick.
Well, the next question is loss, so just do the gain first.
Okay, so this is not a 1 day story, but one time I started this business. It's called Stock Picker, and I was the CEO. And this guy calls me up and he says, "Hey, let's meet for breakfast. I want to be the CEO of your company." So we meet for breakfast, and I meet him for the first time. and he had just sold golf.com to Time Warner for $24 million. And he was going to eventually leave Time Warner, and he wanted, Time Warner was the biggest media company in the world at the time, and they owned AOL, so that's why they bought golf.com. And he said, I want to be CEO of what you're doing. And I said, well, tell me what you would do. And he gave me all these great ideas. He gave me like 10 super great ideas. And I said, this is great. You're a genius. But I can't hire you as CEO because I'm the CEO and I don't really need any new CEO. But I stole all his ideas. And I did every single one of them, and they were great. And maybe 4 or 5 months later, we sold the business for like $10 million. But whatever. I lost all that money, so it doesn't matter. I was an idiot. And but instead of being CEO of my business, my friend Michael, he decided to start his own business. And I said, well, of course, you're going to let me invest, right? And he wasn't even thinking of asking me to invest, but I kind of insisted. And so I put some money in. And, it was the first round. I co-invested with Peter Thiel, Mark Pincus, who started Zynga, and a bunch of other smart people. And a few years later, 5 years later actually, he sold his business to Salesforce.com for $900 million. So that was a good time where I rejected somebody, and that made me a lot of money.
That's a good story, by the way. Are these the .com days?
No, this is 2012 he sold his business.
Oh, okay. So this is recent. On the flip side, you're not shy of saying that your financials have been like a roller coaster. Tell us about like an epic loss, and what did you learn from it? That's the most important component of this.
I was on the set of. Have you seen the TV show Billions? I don't know if it airs in Israel.
It definitely does, and I've definitely seen the first season. And it's a combo of two phenomenal actors. And I love The Shrink most of all. But it's a good show.
Oh, you love The Shrink? Hold on a second. I should. I'll send you a photo of me with The Shrink. Okay, I was making her laugh, and it's a nice photo.
Sure.
I went to the what do you call it? The very first show, the premiere, not the premiere, but
pilot.
I went to the very first show being filmed.
Like the pilot.
Set. Yeah, the pilot. I went to the pilot while it was being filmed. Showtime hadn't even picked it up yet, and I went to the pilot while it was being filmed. And it was such an amazing thing for me. I'd never watched like a TV show pilot like on the set before. So I was watching the director, I was watching all the actors, Damian Lewis and all of the great actors and the way the director was shooting everybody, and I was learning a huge amount. In the middle of the day, I get a phone call. There's going to be an emergency board meeting of a company I'm on the board of in 5 minutes. And so I kind of, step outside. It was cold. I didn't have a coat. I step outside. I figured, what could this emergency board call be? Like, the company's doing great, $1 billion in revenues, public company. My shares were worth about $9 million. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe someone's going to buy the company. This is going to be great. I had no idea about anything. And the news was so bad on the board call that basically the company was out of business within the next week. And so I basically lost $9 million because of that phone call, or because of what I heard on that phone call.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing you were close to that shrink.
Well, actually, she wasn't on the set that day. It wasn't. It wasn't her day to be shot. I met her at another occasion. But then I had to go back to the show because I figure, listen, how often am I on the set of this great? I could tell it was going to be a great TV show. How often am I going to be on the set where I could ask the director questions, the writer, the actors, and I could really learn something that can improve my life? Okay, I just got this horrible news. I mean, $9 million's a big ton of money. I just got this horrible news, maybe like the worst news I've ever gotten in like a 20-minute period, and but I have to follow my own advice. Like, I have to, practice what I preach. And so I ignored the phone call and went back and enjoyed the rest of my day because it was really important to me to do that. And later on, I told the story. Like a year later, I told the story to the writers, And they were like, "Oh my gosh, we thought you had just gone to the bathroom or something. You were all happy and asking questions for the rest of the day. We had no idea." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what happened. I lost $9 million while I was at the bathroom." And so that's an example of something, a horrible loss, but then what I did about it.
If you write an article about it, you can say $9 million down the toilets.
Basically, that I think I have written about it somewhere. I forget. I'll have to look it up.
Is there any golden nugget to learn from this story? In hindsight,
yeah. The thing is, you can't change what you can't control, and you can't be upset about something what you can't control. I mean, you can if you want. That's your choice. But the real key is to make the most of to always make the most of the opportunities that are right in front of you, instead of cry and moan about the past. And so that loss was something that happened. There was no way for me to avoid it. And here I was, also in the middle of a day where I could learn a lot of things and have a lot of fun. And that's what I had to focus on. And that's really the moral. Money you can gain and lose, but a single second of time, you can never make that back again.
Sure. So let me ask you something big picture, the outlook. What are some of the things we do that you think we all do every day, like on a daily basis right now, that you think advancement in technology would replace altogether in the near future? So for instance, we used to use public payphones like 10 years ago. Now they're non-existent. We all use cell phones, etc. Is there anything that you're seeing that will be so dramatically replaced, like in the next 5-6 years, not futuristic 20-30 years, but something that you can say, hey, I think this is where this is going because I've talked to this and this kind of people, and you're going to see major changes in this aspect of your life?
First off, I am so thankful that we don't use public payphones anymore. Those things were disgusting, and I'll tell you a story. The last time I used a public payphone, I was running to get diapers for my baby kid, and I forgot what size she was, so I called my wife. I used a payphone, a public payphone outside the pharmacy, and I called my wife at the time, and I picked up the phone, and I realized after I put it to my ear and next to my hair and everything, there was literally shit all over the phone. So someone had done that on purpose just for me. So I'm glad we don't use payphones anymore. But to answer your question, virtual reality is going to change every single industry we're in, including, like this call we're on right now. We'll actually sit in a room together, a virtual room, and it won't even seem like we'll be in a different room. We'll just be sitting at a table talking to each other, and we'll hit record, and this will be the show.
That's amazing. I just talked to Chris Martinson, if you're familiar, and that's exactly what he told me in an interview maybe 3 or 4 days ago. So do you want to expand on this? Some of the cool ramifications of this?
I mean, think about everything. I've got a better idea. Name me an industry, and I'll tell you how it will completely change by virtual reality.
Sure. Extreme sports and traveling.
Well, obviously extreme sports in two ways. So extreme sports both as a user experience and a viewer experience. So obviously gaming is going to change in a huge way from virtual reality, because with a normal video game, I forget, it's only like one neurochemical gets activated, like your dopamine or whatever. But when you're in a virtual reality, all of your neurochemicals are activated because your body and your brain actually thinks you're in the space. So gaming is going to be completely much more exciting, much more addictive. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but it's going to completely change. And so with extreme sports, you can actually do, even if you're disabled or incapacitated or unhealthy or never did extreme sports before, you're going to actually be able to do extreme sports in virtual reality. Like a great example is, if you're afraid of heights, in a video game, if you're looking over a cliff, no big deal. But if you're in a virtual reality and you're looking over a cliff, you're going to be scared if you're scared of heights. You're going to feel that fear. So that's what's going to happen in extreme sports.
That's amazing.
Or as a viewer, if you're watching extreme sports, you can watch a live stream virtual reality, from a virtual reality point of view. You could be like in the camera of the person engaging in the extreme sport and experience it like that person is experiencing it. Imagine experiencing a sport the way your favorite player in the sport is experiencing it right at that moment, it's going to be a great experience. So name another industry.
No, that's incredible.
You can't even imagine how it would change. And give me a challenge, because extreme sports was easy.
Okay, well, that's because it's a good part of my life. Would you say that virtual reality can change the way people eat?
Good one. Good challenge. Yeah, because when you're eating, it's really good to know how your body is being affected by the food. So maybe you'll see in the virtual reality how your body is changing, or how it will change from the food you're eating, or how many calories you're eating right then. I don't know. Hold on a second. I'm going to ask my physical trainer is here in the room, and she's going to answer the question. What are you saying?
You could walk into cafes and restaurants, literally virtual in real time.
And how will you eat the food?
So that means that everybody will be healthy and she'll be out of the job, basically.
She's fine if she's out of a job.
Okay.
With jobs, you have to constantly reinvent in life. Okay, so her point is, in terms of the eating experience, you could go to the world's most famous restaurant with the most famous chef, and
smell the food.
You could smell the food. Your taste buds could taste the food. Now, I don't know then how you would actually eat the food, though. But
that's interesting.
That's tricky.
That's interesting. I want your take. I want your take on something that's very untalked about. People just don't talk about this, and I find this so fascinating. I want to get your take on investing during a bear market, because everyone talks about investing during bull markets, obviously. What are some strategies that you've learned? You've managed. You're a hedge fund manager. What are some strategies to implement during a bear market? And is there anything you're very bearish about right now that's worth knowing about? And just in a general way, or I don't know what your legal requirements are. Can you tell us a little bit of what you're doing regarding things that you're bearish about?
Well, let me ask you a question. Have we ever been in a bearish market?
Yeah, definitely.
When?
Yeah, for which country, for everything.
The global stock market.
Well, obviously there was many instances with bear markets, and we don't have to go back to see 2008. But
all right. Well, 2008. Let's look at what your best strategy would have been at the end of 2008. The worst part of the bear market. Obviously, your best strategy would have been to buy stocks.
Yes, of course.
But what about the strategy right before? So in November 2007 was like the peak right before it started to fall.
Sure.
What would have been your strategy then? Your best strategy then would have been to buy stocks, because look where we are. We're within 1 or 2% of all-time highs on the stock market.
Sure.
So you can't really predict ups and downs in the market. What you can predict, though, is that for the past 10,000 years, all we've done as a species is innovate. Technology always increases, and now it's increasing exponentially faster than it's ever increased before. So innovation has never ever gone into a bear market, and ultimately, anything that's tagged to innovation will never go down in the long run, even if it goes down in the short run. So yes, there are going to be times when you're going to say, oh my gosh, this feels really scary because stocks have fallen 40%. But look where we are. Stocks fell 40 or 50% or more, and we're back at all-time highs. So you just have to stick to good companies that are tied to good innovation. Now, are there scary things that are happening in the stock market? Yes. Systemically, underneath the market, we've never seen more money passively invested. And by that I mean passive money that's in ETFs, exchange traded funds. And so what does that mean? Well, when the market slips, a mutual fund manager can decide what stocks to sell or not when he gets withdrawals. But an ETF can't decide. They just have to sell all their stocks all the time. And so that creates this death spiral of stocks going down even faster, and then the ETFs go down even more. And so because we're at an all-time high of passive money in ETFs, we don't really know what's going to happen the the next time there's a fear trade, the next time people make a trade just because they're afraid and they're scared. So that could create enormous volatility in the market. We don't know. But again, what's going to happen is, it'll be really scary, and then eventually markets will be back at all-time highs.
I understand. You're taking a point, and this is a very advanced, and I've read many books about it. It's called basically the if you know the book, it's called The Triumph of the Optimists, and obviously what you're saying is absolutely correct, that in the long run the best companies do so much advancement every year that their share prices reflect that. And you're obviously correct that any dollar you invested in Coca-Cola in 1928 would be worth millions today. So we are totally in agreement with that regard. But obviously there's times when prices don't go up, and I was referring to those times. But James, I wanna ask you this. I wanna ask you a question that's in 3 parts. And would you just go 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds? And
yes.
The first 30 seconds would
I'll
be.
try.
Yeah.
I'm long-winded.
Yeah. Well, have the personal trainer time it. So. The first 20 seconds is for people who are 20 to 30 year old and are listening to this. The second part is for career type people that are already 30 to 50, and then 50 and above. Now, if you had like 30 seconds with each person, what are some of the things that you would be asking them in order to expose things that you can help them, guide them a little bit better in life, and ask them, what are some of the questions that they basically should be asking themselves in order to make this next step in life, just to be happier and more relaxed, more in general, better?
Okay, I got it.
Sure.
So the good thing is I have a minute. I have 90 seconds because I have the same answer for all 3, which is, always ask yourself if every day you're improving your sense of well-being. And well-being maybe can be defined as, your relationships. So are you bit by bit, slowly by slowly, trimming away the toxic people in your life and adding to your life good people who you love and who love you, and so on? And B, are you increasing your competence in something you love doing? So if you love programming or investing or writing or whatever, try to improve just 1% a day at this thing. 1% a day compounds very quickly. And, it's hard to quantify 1%, but just pretend. And finally, are you improving your sense of freedom? Like you said earlier, simplifying some things in your life and getting more and more sense that you're the one who makes the decisions for your life as opposed to other people. If you just do that a little bit each day, your life is going to get better and better.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
That's the same thing for all 3 groups.
Yeah, very well. So James, people who want to learn more about you and enjoy the variety of services, products that you provide, where would they go? And if you had to choose one book that you wrote to get people started off with, which one would that be to get familiarized with James and basically your philosophy?
Well, the book Choose Yourself, I would definitely recommend. So I wrote that, and the idea is that in this day and age and in this economy, you kind of have to choose your own direction and not expect external validation. And there are ways now more than ever to get rid of the gatekeepers and choose yourself for success. And then I also have a book coming out soon called Reinvent Yourself, because we're always in a constant state of reinvention. But if you go to jamesaltucher.com, there's basically links to everything.
James, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're very busy, and people will love this interview. This has been a very eye-opening interview, and hopefully we can have you on again later on.
Definitely, Lior. Thanks so much for asking me to come on.
This has been a really unique interview for me because I appreciate the work that James does, and I consider him one of the ultimate thinkers of our times. James talks about great daily routines to adopt, and you cannot stress the importance of daily disciplines enough. Then we talked about business and what works in today's world. So I hope you gained a lot from that segment. Then James talks about his biggest financial gains and losses, and these are some crazy wild stories. And my take on this is that everyone must first of all know the 5 principles of investing success, and that's on our special reports page. I really can't stress enough. This is by far more important than any specific stock pick ever. Please go download that, have it as your weekend read, and you'll be a superb investor after you're done with it. Secondly, it's important to have capital in long-term wealth stocks, which compound at market-beating rates and build your fortune over decades. And you know, we recommended 2 this year that have done very well. You can go to our website, and then on the top menu, wealth stocks, you can see the 2 companies that we chose this year, and we're about to launch 2 more. So you can subscribe on the homepage, and you'll get it for free on your email. Thirdly, to become a smart speculator, or what we call a Metalionaire, which is a resource investor who is disciplined enough to handle volatility, wise enough to be diversified among exploration companies, producers, steroid stocks, targeted buyouts, and safe satellite businesses. Now, if you don't know these terms, you know, our most advanced and thorough research is on our special reports page, and our email alerts when we complete our due diligence about a company goes out immediately to members of our free 365 wealth letter. So you can simply, you know, sign up on our homepage and you're opt-in. That's it. You give us a test drive. Hopefully you learned a lot and gained a lot from James, and please check out more about him on his website, jamesaltucher.com, as well as on Amazon. You'll be glad you did. Tune in as we continue to bring you just the best of titans of industry, and you'll continue to gain more knowledge mentally and just be a better human being, a better investor every time you listen to one of our interviews. So see you next week. Till then.